Brother,
Hey
we're
there, you
gonna
beautiful son bitch.
we're gonna keep going.
All
But
right, so
we're gonna act like this is a brand new episode, even though we're sitting here recording all at once. Let's do it to it. What are you
we
drinking,
are
sir?
again. So before I get into what I'm drinking, again, I would
Okay.
like to stress to the fans, if you want to consider yourself a fan, the listeners, if you will, the people who listen because they know us as Marines, and like I'm going to listen to see what they have to say. Um, we're doing this for a reason. We're doing this because, unfortunately, for the holidays and everything like that, and then one audio file getting corrupted. We could not put out episodes as quickly as we would have liked just because of family,
I mean, I
obligations,
had
things we have to do.
finals, we had Thanksgiving, we had Christmas, we had New Year's. You're looking for a job. I'm still in school. Like, I mean, life's pretty busy.
It is. So we're trying to do this to extend our ability to give you content and
Consistently.
release. And also, I would say that most of you probably only have 30 minutes to an hour drive to work. So we're trying to condense this into either your drive home to work or from work so that you get that episode in. And we're going to do this into the future as well for all of our future research and future podcasts as well.
Yep.
But with that being said, I am drinking a little bit of Heaven Hill bottle down there in Bardstown, Kentucky. There's actually a Bardstown bourbon. I'm curious if it's the same distillery. I'm not sure. I did have a green label Bardstown not too long ago. I had a little bit of a cinnamon kickback to it. Um, but this one's really good. It's only aged about 7 years, but it's been family owned since 1935. Good old Heaven Hill, under U.S. government supervision, bottled in bond.
Well, it sounds like we gotta make a little road trip, do some research, see if it's the
And
same
dude,
distillery.
we can research this shit. Let's do a hit podcast on that.
Dude, let's do it. I'm still working on some Woodford. It's in the rotation. I have like 5 bottles in my rotation. I come to your place to get a variety.
I do.
So
I always keep a variety on the wall, man.
I know, and it's like my third favorite thing about you.
Yeah, third favorite. We'll take third.
Yeah, we won't go number one and two. It's a family podcast.
Kind of a family podcast. I don't know of any high schoolers or kids that are listening to this podcast, so adult humor is welcomed.
He says as he mischievously fixes his mustache. But
All right.
but
So
but
we
yeah,
left off last episode kind of at the start of the Italian campaign. We didn't really talk about the Italian campaign. What we kind of talked about was Josephine and Napoleon and the early kind of start of their relationship and Napoleon's infatuation with her. And
because dude was
really,
down bad,
oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
like
And
real
really,
bad.
really kind of her misdoings in this early parts of the relationship. But again, this is not the Napoleon Josephine podcast. It is the Napoleon podcast.
Yes.
So I will allow you kind of a moment to discuss the Italian campaign, but I want to start with kind of a question because I did kind of lead into it a little bit with Toulon. But why were we fighting the British in the midst of all of this, where there's still civil unrest in France, and really the Republic is still trying to like grasp at straws of power?
Yeah.
Why are we fighting the British?
Well, that's like literally because of the civil unrest in France. Like the whole idea of overthrowing a monarch. I mean, you have to think Europe is ruled by like a couple families at this point.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
all monarchies. It's all kings and emperors and queens, and you have political marriages, and again, we see this being an issue leading into World War I, right?
Oh, dude, big.
Yeah, like and World War I is the end of monarchs in Europe. So like I mean this is like where I would say obviously kings and queens have been fighting for forever because yes, um, but this is where I really see the beginning of that whole dynamic start to crumble. Um, but it's because of the French Revolution that the rest of these European powers, Austria, Prussia, and primarily the British, really have an issue with France because they just saw their buddy Louis the 16th, who's related to them somehow, just guillotined pretty much in their eyes because the people suck and there was no reason for it. And these commoners need to learn their place because they were granted their position by God and God alone. You
Oh,
know, we talked
the
about that.
expansion of the divine right of kings.
Yes, that's exactly it. Um, so these other European powers like really, really freaking believe that, right? So that was the whole point that why the French were fighting the British is because the British were actively resisting the French Revolution to preserve the whole monarchy system that was in place in Europe. Because if one topples, how much longer, you know? I mean, England especially, because they just got done with the American Revolution, right? We, you know, as Americans, we proved that, you know, monarchies aren't end all be all. We can be a democratic small r republic. Um, and now that France is doing it, well, how long before the people of England itself are doing it? How long are the people of Prussia going to put up with it? Like Russia, fuck. How long are the people of Russia going to put up with it? Right.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
as we know, you know, with how that whole went down.
So I think it's funny, and this is the reason I think it's funny, and me and you've kind of talked about this a little bit, but you look at Britain or England getting involved at this point, and there's really this constant throughout history where England and France are like at each other's
Mm-hmm.
throats,
All the time.
and one of my favorite movies, A Knight's Tale, right?
Mm.
And you talked about Toulon
I
last time,
watched that
right?
movie last night.
Dude, I love that fight. It was still one of my favorites, right? Um, and you talked about Toulon and the position they were in then when they were taken over by Napoleon. And the first thing that came to mind was French wine too strong for English belly. You know what I'm saying? And with that being said, that's just a kind of an anecdote that helps to describe the distaste between the
Oh yeah.
French and the English, right? So it's funny that despite the American Revolution and the French support for the Americans, that the British see it at this point kind of as a two-pronged approach. Hey, this is threatening our divine right of kings and
Mm-hmm.
monarchism, but also, hey, you're in disarray. I can take advantage of this.
Oh, absolutely. Um, and something that I'm going to bring up, and now that you bring up A Knight's Tale, I'm going to reference it too. Um, in that same conversation, for those who haven't seen the movie, it's a bunch of Englishmen and one woman and a bunch of Frenchmen
Yeah.
all in a bar, and they're debating on who's going to win the tournament with the, you know, the jousting and the swords and the maces and all that medieval stuff. Um, and they were just like, well, the Frenchmen are like, well, the Pope is French, and so, you know, we French Pope, you know, we've got God on our side. And one of the English characters says, well, the Pope may be French, but by God, Jesus was English, which is not true at all. But
Yeah, no.
but but it just goes in kind of like, you know, maybe I'm looking too deep into this Heath Ledger comedy movie, but
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
it kind of goes into like, you know, at the source of all of it is the papacy and religious aspects, which will
Yep.
come into a lot bigger role later in Napoleon's reign. Everyone kind of knows the story of when he crowned himself emperor instead of the Pope, but it
Oh yeah.
actually goes way deeper than that. Um, and you really start seeing that, and this is what I'm going to blow your mind on during the Egyptian campaign. Um, but going back to the Italian campaign, because we have to get through this and all of his military glory before we get to Egypt. And I know we
Oh
both
yeah.
really want to get to Egypt.
Yes.
um, but you know, this is the fighting between England and Germany and Prussia and Russia. It was all part of what's known as the War of the First Coalition, right? And this is where we start seeing coalitions like gang up on France, or particularly the French Revolution, um, to to initially start suppressing these revolutionary ideals. And why that's kind of important is, what did I just say? England and Germany and Prussia, none of those are Italy, right? So what are we doing in Italy?
Well, Germany
Um,
wasn't even a country then, to my knowledge.
no, it was just a territory. Yeah,
Yeah, oh yeah.
it was still Prussia and Austria,
Yeah.
which
Oh yeah.
comes into
Or
comes
Austria-Hungary.
into, and so that leads the army of Italy, which is Napoleon's army in Italy. You'll notice a theme of what he likes to name his armies. Eventually, we'll get to the Grande Armée, which is just his big ass army. um, but now, why was he appointed this generalship? Well, like I said, the Battle of Toulon, right? Showed off his strategic mind, his generalship, but also, Josephine played a role in it too, because she was in those inner circles. Um, she played a very big role in Napoleon's kind of like understanding, because keep in mind he was from the gentry, but not the high up gentry.
Oh
So
yeah.
he was very rough around the edges in these big cultural, political, like social settings. And his marriage to Josephine, having been in that social setting, and being the woman known for her elegance and sophistication in a world of drunken and terrible revolutionists, um, had given him some sort of prestige to go with it. Um, and that carried over into his esteem with the National Assembly, which, like I said in our last episode, was presided by Robespierre. What you munching
Yep.
on?
I got some salami and cheese. Hard
Nice.
salami and cheese.
Midwest as hell. I love
Oh yeah.
that.
As I miss my mouth.
Yeah, dude.
And
Be
jalapeno
better.
cheese, dude. I'm gonna get you this next time you come down. I'm
Oh,
sorry, I'm
hell
not
yeah.
trying to interrupt the podcast.
Oh no, you're
Um,
good. This is what we
but
do.
this can stay in here. This is 4 alarm cheese, and your first bite, if you don't necessarily like spicy, should throw you back a little bit.
I like spicy a fair bit.
I love spicy.
I know you do. That's why we get along.
Yep.
Um, but yeah, I know um my body doesn't really like spicy. Like, even if I'm eating it just fine, like even if I have like mild wings from Buffalo Wild Wings, I'll still like start sweating, and like my eyes will start watering. I'm like, this isn't even spicy. Like, I don't know. But so now Napoleon is in charge of the army of Italy, and he's got to think of something to go do with it. Um, and I guess that's kind of where he winds up in Italy. You know, really nothing more. Or we just got to dive in, don't we?
I mean, we do. I think the big thing here is we talk about the Italian campaign, and I think somebody like me who is a lover of history and is a part of this podcast, I think that our listeners would question at this point, why Italy? I guess what were kind of the motives?
Well, because the National Assembly, or the Continental Congress for us Americans. Sorry, my mic's over here. Because the National Assembly is like calling the shots now, he's sent down to Italy just to pretty much drive out Austrian forces. And it was almost seen as like a secondary campaign. Like, it wasn't where the main fighting was happening. It wasn't anything crazy. It was just like, hey, we're fighting, Austrians and Prussians and Englishmen. But just go take care of the Austrians down in Italy. And with that comes bolstering the French revolutions, or the French Republic, excuse me, by looting wealth, just
Yep.
ransacking, securing supply lines, just to sustain the war effort. Napoleon's, honestly, he does this all the time. He constantly lives off of the land. That's one of his main avenues of elongating his campaigns. Again, something that we see for not the first time, because obviously living off the land is something that people have done for forever.
Yep.
But like strategically planning to live off of your enemy's resources in a grand scale, we see this happen. This was the plan that Robert E. Lee had when he was invading Pennsylvania in 1863.
Hmm.
Like, I mean, he planned on just taking from the Union when he was up
Yep.
there. So it's like, it's nothing new, but it is definitely something that Napoleon keeps in his back pocket, like pretty consistently throughout his campaigns.
I would also say that I imagine my Napoleon
Mm.
as a huge fangirl.
I like these little snippets of DJ's Napoleon thrown in
Yeah,
there.
yeah. So I imagine my Napoleon completely fangirling the entire time through Italy because he's such a Rome fan. All right, well,
Oh,
Julius Caesar
dude,
fan.
with his baby hands, dude,
Yeah,
he's just
yeah, yeah. He's just going by statues. Like that's what he spends his day doing. Like he gets limo, everybody else goes out gets drunk. He just goes by like Julius Caesar statues.
yeah, dude. Dude, I bet he was in heaven. I didn't even think about that.
Yeah, dude, fangirling the whole time.
Be like, look at that aqueduct.
Yeah,
Napoleon, that's the same aqueduct we saw 2 miles ago.
yeah,
But it's like right there. Like it's so cool.
yeah, dude. Late
These
18th
babies used to go
century.
for miles.
Yeah, dude, late 18th century Swifty, just getting after it.
It's just straight up just, man, you think Julius Caesar saw that tree? Like,
Oh yeah, dude.
um, but his like tertiary objective is to set up like satellite governments, like republics, spread that. Like I said, they're only at war with everybody because they want to overthrow monarchies. If they set up more republics, it's only spreading republicanism throughout Europe
Yep.
rather than allowing monarchies to exist. So setting up those satellite republics is a huge benefit to the cause. And I'm gonna run through some battles here, some campaigns. There's a couple different snippets here, but I don't to go through every single one of his major battles and to give a detailed account of it would make this podcast like 35 hours long.
Yep, that's fair. We'll
And
just we'll broad
so
stroke it.
there's little things I like to add in here. Key highlights and a strategy. Like the Montagnais campaign in April of 1796, Napoleon just consistently outmaneuvered the Austrians and the Sardinian forces there, and pretty much isolated them and forced Sardinia to like sue for peace. Like he literally just
Oh,
outmaneuvered and like outflanked his enemy the entire time.
you're right. And you know what I forgot to talk about
It,
in the last episode, which you made a great point, and that brought it up, dude. That reignited the flame. So, what I think it's important for the listeners to understand is that there was huge developments between like the 7 Years' War and this revolution.
mm-hmm.
And at the revolution, we introduced a standing army in France where that becomes a profession.
Yeah. No,
And
yeah, absolutely.
and it's not a conscription, right? So we talk about how successful Napoleon is, and that's a big point of this podcast. But it's also important to note that now we've transitioned from conscription and like seasons of war to like Napoleon's like, but and that seasons of war thing is a big thing
Yeah.
in a couple points during this
Yes,
this
it
whole
is.
Napoleon podcast, right? But we transitioned from that like seasons of war, which is what they used to have. Like summer and spring are great times to fight war, early fall.
Yeah, because it's
But
not uncomfortable to be outside.
yep, yep. But now we look at France under the small R Republic, um, and we see a standing army. This is now
Mhm.
their profession. They're not a baker. And then during the summer, when they're like, hey, let's go to war, the bell's ringing, and then they stop being a baker and pick up a
Yeah.
rifle.
No, like these are people who just believe in the revolution.
Yes.
Yeah, like and I do want to say that conscripts do come in play quite a bit later on.
Yep.
Um,
Yep.
but as of right now, absolutely, it is a standing army, pretty much almost entirely made up of volunteers. They're all "Vive la France," "Vive la Revolution," just Kool-Aid and all.
Oh, 100%. And the last thing I'll note as we continue on to the Italian campaign is I had spoke about it briefly last episode. I did not go deep into it. But the feudal age, the Divine Right of Kings was kind of the stopper, was the cork on top of the wine bottle that was
Hmm.
really kind of stopping that industrial revolution. Once the revolution happened, the industrial age kicked in, and France started to mass produce not only rifles, but cannons, artillery, things of that nature.
Oh yeah.
And that's a huge
And,
part of this campaign.
oh yeah, for sure. And he used that because, like I said, he really preferred the 12 pounders,
Yep.
and they had things like what was it, 24 and 36 pounders.
They
Yeah,
did.
they shot a bigger shot, but he really loved the pretty ladies because they were just so much more maneuverable, you know, which leads to him like being able to focus on Sardinia, making them sue for peace right off rip, and then just being able to focus on Austria and Italy
Yep.
instead of fighting two different countries, get one to capitulate and then focus on the other, divide and conquer. Like we're going to
Yep.
see this time and time again. Um, and then next in May of 1796, he's riding the high from the Montagnais campaign. You got the Battle of Lodi or Lodi, depending on, I've heard it pronounced both ways. Again,
I'm
not
gonna
the
go with
French
Creedence
for it.
Clearwater Revival. It's Lodi. It's
Okay,
it's
Lodi.
CCR, baby.
You know what? Absolutely.
Yep.
Lodi, brother.
Yeah.
I'm all on board for that.
Yeah.
Uh, Napoleon's forces, they ended up defeating the Austrian rear guard at the Adda River. And this earned him like the nickname the Little Corporal because he led a lot of his attacks like from the front. Like this dude was a general who would be charging in front of privates. So it was
Yep.
like he was that small unit leader, the corporal, and just taking charge of his Marines or his soldiers in this case, and just charging. At Toulon, he was one of the first dudes up the ladders after the assault was like commenced. He waited until he committed all of his forces, literally fucking charged. His horse got fucking shot out from underneath him with a cannonball. He ends up taking that and just like keeping it as a memento. Like crazy.
Yeah.
Dude
So
just led from the front.
for those that have not seen the Napoleon movie, they actually accurately depict that part
They
in the
do.
Napoleon movie.
Which that movie I'm so up in the air on. There's some really
I
good
know.
parts.
I know.
I I think Joaquin Phoenix did great for Joaquin Phoenix. The more I learn about Napoleon, the more I don't find him as socially awkward as Joaquin Phoenix made him out to be.
Yeah, it made him extremely socially awkward, dude.
Yeah, and he just wasn't. He could, like I was telling you earlier, he literally talked his way into IOUs.
Yep.
How do you do that while like
Being socially awkward, you don't.
yeah, you just don't.
You don't. You're a
Now
personable person.
no, I think they over analyzed the whole him being uncomfortable in like those higher end echelon settings that he was put in very early
Because he
on in
wasn't
his
used to it.
career.
He wasn't used to it.
Exactly. He wasn't born into that life. I mean, he kind of was, but like not really because he was from Corsica and that the French didn't like Corsicans because they were considered like
Yeah.
dirtbags and ruffians and just
Yep.
savages. Um, and I didn't mention it in the first one, but since we're talking about how France feels about Corsica, he actually, until about the age of 14 or 15, Napoleon Bonaparte. So he kept his Italian root. And then
Yep.
eventually he just dropped it and went to Bonaparte to become more French. His brother, I don't even know how to pronounce his Italian Corsican first name, but Joseph. He changed it to Joseph to fit in. So they adopted that.
Josefa. Josefa. Oui, oui. No. So
I don't
with that
think
being,
I've looked at the analytics. I don't think we have any French listeners.
that's fine. They would love this anyway. They hate Americans anyway. I'm joking. But with that being said, I do think that that's interesting to bring up again and to kind of highlight that in comparison to the movie. Same way we did with Aham, because we did do Aham in
Mhm.
comparison to the play.
Yeah.
And I think that the Napoleon movie did well enough to where we should probably kind of talk about some of those things
Yep.
and understanding that if you were to look at this from the chivalrous age, the knights and the cast and everything that comes with that, he would be like a hedge knight. He would be this individual that's like out in where they might have some sort of nobility. They're a
Mhm.
nobility of like this fringe area of the realm that nobody really gives a shit about.
Yeah, I mean, they're just second class citizens, and he was a second class gentry at that. You
Yeah,
know, like
dude, 100%. 100%. So
um,
I don't mean to fucking interrupt that, but I do think it's important to understand that when you talk about him being the little corporal and we also talk about like his social interactions. Um, but yeah, he was little corporal
yeah,
leading from the front and Lodi.
yeah, and this is probably a good time to bring up the fact that the Napoleon movie does a lot of things, like we said, really well. It gets a little bit wrong here and there, but what I think, if we look at, instead of Napoleon, it was more of a Napoleon Josephine movie. And I think so. I think it really captures their relationship rather well, especially during
Dude,
the potential dynastic years.
yes.
Um, I think the movie did really well in that aspect. But Napoleon and his generalship and the political side, every now and then.
Yeah.
Um, but after the Battle of Lodi, he captured Milan, and he established French dominance in Lombardy. So he's got himself, what do we call it? A nice good old foothold,
Yeah.
right?
A great
He is
foothold.
he is
Fantastic foothold.
in Italy.
Yeah. And it's
Um,
a win it, baby. Throw all the chips in.
oh
Bet it all
yeah,
on black. We're gonna risk it all.
and he does it all the time, like all the time, which kind of adds to his credence. Not to jump too far ahead, but this is where we start seeing these roots, man, because he's coming off this victory after victory after victory, and he gets this sense of like predestination, or this inherent sense of like, I am bound for greatness. I am bound for being a legend. And this is where it kind of all starts to take root, because he does commit big, and he leads from the front, and he gets horses shot out from under him, and he walks away scot free almost every time.
Yep. He
Like
feels like almost he's invincible at this point.
he's laying the brickwork and the foundation for his godlike. Not, he never claims to be a god, okay,
But
but
people see him that way.
it's laying that framework of like, I am better than human.
Yep.
um and I think this is the root. Like, this campaign goes so well for him.
Well, and so it's funny, and you know, I make that comment about betting it on black, risk it all. For those of you that don't know, Matt and I within our company, one of the big jokes because we would always do our Marine Corps balls in Vegas. A bunch
Brother,
of individuals went in early on in our trips to Vegas during the ball, and they would bet all their money on black on roulette, and
who would do
risk it all,
that?
risk it all, right, and see if they win. Some of them won 10 grand, some of them lost 3 grand,
Dude,
whatever it is.
here's
So
a little Vegas. Oh no, go ahead, I'm sorry.
when I say that, because you're probably going to hear that from me several times in this podcast, when I say bet it all on black, willing to risk it all, you're going to hear that from me a couple times in this podcast, just based on what Napoleon Bonaparte does in some of these campaigns.
Oh dude, he just, like, I don't know a better way to say it, but he just big dicks it the entire
Yep.
time.
Yep.
Like,
Yep. So speaking of that, you're about to go down the rabbit hole.
oh no, I'll stay on topic. It's
Okay.
not
All right.
relevant.
All right.
um but after Milan and the seizing Lombardy, he moves on to the siege of Montauk, and it's like a super heavily fortified, like, Austrian presence in northern Italy. um and ultimately, this goes on from 96 to 97, which, you kind of already hinted to, season of war. What does that mean? If it goes on from 96 to 97, it's probably
Yeah.
through the winter,
Yep.
right? Yeah, so he realizes that he doesn't have enough supplies to keep pushing on. The weather's changing, people are fortifying, and he thinks that he's gotten to Montauk before they have enough of a chance to supply the city to last through a siege through the winter, right? And so he ends up besieging, which he actually doesn't do all that often in his career. He does not like to sit still for a siege. He is a very active dude. Dude barely sleeps. Like,
Yep.
he consistently will just be working and then sleep for 2 hours and then just go back to work, and he would take long hot baths because, and he writes it in a letter, but I don't have that sourced. I just, he, it references over and over and over again. That 1 hour in the bath is equivalent to 4 hours of sleep. So he constantly is taking these hot baths. Not constantly, but he's taking long hot baths.
Regularly.
Yeah, sleeping 2 hours at a time. Like, even before he's gonna order a massive assault at stand two, um, he's going to bed at 2:30 in the morning.
So can I add real quick to just kind of to that? And this is
Yeah, absolutely.
I would say that this is the like the sociology, psychology side of me, which has a very little study into it. Um but there's probably a degree of degradation of mental health that begins in this Italian campaign and leads on to later issues as we get into uh, I don't know, the second rise of Napoleon, the last campaign of Napoleon before his second rise, things like that. So there are little things here that we know now, like in 2024 or 2025, sorry, we have passed the new year,
Ooh.
um, that you look at and you have to realize like we did it as Marines, we do it. Army does it, Air Force does it, Navy does it. Most armed forces across the world do it, and it's this level of sleep deprivation
Oh
that
yeah.
quite literally deteriorates your ability to think along the normal lines of, I would say, reality or comprehension.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
Eh,
what is it? I think if you're up for 24 hours, you're the equivalent of blowing point oh 0.08.
yep,
Like,
yep.
so, I mean, you're legally mentally intoxicated just in sleep deprivation.
Dude, 100%. Sammy gets it on me fucking all the time
Oh yeah.
because like I won't eat and then like I'll sleep like 4 or 5 hours. I'm like, no, I'm good. And just go back at it. And she'll be like, no, dude, like I need you around. Like stop being stupid.
Dude, that's how I used to be before I got sick. That's how I was. I would sleep like maybe 2, 3 hours a night. It just go, go, go. And then randomly catnap here and then catnap there and then just go, go, go.
Oh yeah, dude. And the only reason I bring that up is just to kind of give a little bit of an idea to the listeners as we talk about what the hell this man was doing
Oh yeah.
and how at the early stages, especially in Mantua, um, not to be confused with Haktua, how
Hey, hey, hey. She's getting sued, I'm pretty sure. Or no, she's got felonies now, doesn't she?
yeah, she does. Don't start a Haktua coin and expect to win. But with that being said, anybody who bought it, I'm sorry for your loss, but you shouldn't have done that in the
You know
first place.
better.
Yep. But with that being said, you have to understand what this dude is putting into this campaign and this siege. Um, Not only the fact that Matt brought up, like, hey, he's stagnant for this point in time. He's always active. He's always moving. He's always attacking. He's always ambushing. But also what he's doing now in hindsight to his own health. When he's like, I sleep 2 hours a night and I go back to work and I walk the lines and make sure everybody's in defensive posture. But it's okay. I take a bath for an hour every couple days and it's like I slept. Dude, wild.
Dude,
Wild.
yeah. This dude's he's crazy, dude. I'm telling you. Um, and speaking of sitting on his hands, even during a siege, he wasn't, because Austria obviously sees that they're getting besieged in Mantua. Um, and so they send a couple different smaller armies to try to relieve the city. And they turn into some major battles, particularly the Battle of Castiglione, Arcole, and Rivoli. They were three separate attempts, obviously at three separate towns that the Austrians were using to try to reinforce Mantua. And Napoleon outmaneuvered, outflanked, and then subsequently just outgunned all of them, to the point where in February 1797, Austria just gave up Mantua and subsequently lost control of their portion of northern Italy. Um,
Yeah. So I think it's important as you note those and like the superiority there. I think it's important to note what we talked about with the kind of the Industrial Revolution and
mhm,
also Napoleon's fantastically tactical mind, which you brought up in the last podcast about Napoleon.
yeah.
Um, this is kind of the start of the point for me looking at it historically, where the rest of the European Union was like, "Oh, dude, we're fucked. Like, we need to do something together because we're fucked."
Oh yeah, because he's just running through them. Like he's winning battles he's not supposed to be winning. He's making moves. He's doing strategies that are just unheard of. Like who besieges a city in the middle of the winter? Like that's just not heard of. But he was living off of the land. All of these big battles that he was winning, like Castiglione and Arcole, like he's taking the enemy supplies with that. He's living off of the enemy at a certain point because he's too is in winter during campaign. So his supply lines are slowing down at the same time. So he's got lemons, he's making lemonade, and he's moving on. Like he's about to open up an entire store, not just a stand.
Yeah, because lines are not running from France at this point.
Yeah.
We're not talking about World War I here, where we fight through everything and we got railroads that are running supply lines, things like we don't have that,
Yeah,
dude.
no, when we're still on horses. Like this is
Yes.
just after the American Revolution. And you know what? I think the biggest thing of why I didn't look into Napoleon earlier is it's such an awkward time period. Because as Americans, we see like the revolution, and then we kind of like hear about the War of 1812. And then, which we're gonna get to later, I promise. Um, because Napoleon's in power for the War of 1812,
He
aka
is.
American Revolution 2.0.
Yep.
So it plays a really cool dynamic. Um, but also like we're not quite to the Civil War. So like we're seeing these things like I don't know, the Gatling gun, the original Gatling gun being invented in this time period. Like, I mean, it's
Was
such a
that
weird
was
thing.
that in 1796 around that area? Or
No, it
are you
was
talking about
early
War of 1812?
1800s.
Okay, I'm sorry. We jumped
The,
ahead
the
of ourselves. I'm
Gatling
sorry.
gun and the Gatling gun in general.
Like 1806 or
Uh,
something like that.
well, it says 1861, but I specifically remember it earlier than that. I'll have to do
I
some
don't know.
more
We could be
research
way
on
off.
that.
We could have just fudged
We
our
are
podcast
machine
there for a
gunners,
second.
so machine
Yeah.
guns should be around for forever, right?
Our nickname is Machine Dumbers.
Yeah. Rock eaters.
Yeah. But
Um,
with that being said, I do think it is important to note, um, especially because of your emphasis on, conquering Mantua and getting those supplies, that is like a livelihood for the entire French army at this point.
yeah, like it's keeping them afloat. And with this campaign, like I said, they're looting. Now granted the National Assembly in their infinite wisdom gets a portion. And look at Sammy all posted up back there.
Yeah, she'd land on the couch. She didn't read her books.
um nerd who
He
reads
called you he
books
called you a nerd. He said he reads books as we're sitting here going over history and collecting notes.
over our research from books.
She said, "You're talking shit because I'm reading."
um but no, so something that we see here now is Napoleon's first interactions with royalty outside of the Bourbons. For those of you who might not be familiar, the Bourbon family or Bourbon family was
Bone,
the French monarchy.
not the same
Um,
bourbon.
not bourbon, not
Yeah.
our bourbon, but Bourbon or however the French speak it. But they were the ruling family of France before the Revolution. Um, and once Napoleon takes over northern Italy and like moves into that Austrian held territory, that's when he gets another family who runs Austria to start the negotiation project process known as the Habsburgs. And they're going to come up quite a bit as we keep going. So that's why I'm kind of
Yes.
highlighting their name now.
Yep.
This is the first real interaction between the Habsburgs and Napoleon. They happen much more often later down the road whenever he becomes first consul and ultimately when he becomes emperor, because even though he is an emperor, Napoleon leads from the fucking front. So he goes out on all these campaigns and he does all of the dirty work. Like, so he goes and he actually negotiates with these kings and emperors as he was a monarch himself, even though, and this is where it starts ruffling some feathers back in France, even though the National Assembly is supposed to be the legislative body, Napoleon kind of takes it apart like upon himself to start this whole negotiation process, which he really doesn't have the power or authority to do, but he kind of starts sneaking it in there anyway.
Well, I mean, look at people he idolized, Julius Caesar, things like that, right?
Yeah, and they did the exact same
Alexander the
fucking
Great,
thing.
things like that. Like these people were um, leading emperors, and they were on a conquest, and they did the same thing. Napoleon's literally taking what he read and bringing it to fruition.
Yeah. I mean, he tries time and time again. Hell, even the title of first consul, he rips straight from Rome.
Yeah, and he doesn't even have
He,
that yet at this point that we're talking.
no,
He doesn't
but
even have that yet.
like that's how ingrained that this guy is in like the Roman history
Yep.
and the Macedonian history.
Macedonian, you fucking asshole.
For those of you listening, it could be pronounced either way. In my opinion, Macedonia sounds a little bit more pretentious, so that's why I say it. Um, but that leads us to Napoleon treating with the Habsburgs, and that ends with the Treaty of Campo Formio in October of 1797. I just butchered that name, but we're gonna roll with it. And here are those terms. I'm just going to list them off. Austria recognized French control over northern Italy and the Netherlands. And the previously neutral Venice was ceded to Austria's compensation, dissolving the centuries old Venetian Republic. And why that's important is they weren't even a part of this war. Like they were independent. They didn't have a stake in it. They had declared neutrality. Yeah, they were in Italy, but they weren't part of anything that was going on. And France just like, okay, you can have that. Just let us have this. And it just went through. And it just completely dissolved the very tiny republic's like autonomy. And kind of went to show that Napoleon wasn't scared to make those big, rash, bold decisions that could potentially have very big consequences. You start trampling on republics to form other republics, it's kind of imperialistic.
It
Um,
is. It is. It's an extension of the fear that that Britain has at this time, that this is
mhm.
this rising cause. And I think it's important to note, and you research and put in your notes that not only does it do all that and instill fear in the monarchs in the region, but it also ends the first coalition against France. Like we have several
Yeah.
united countries that are like, we're going to fight France on this. And France is like, okay, show me what you got. Show me your
Well,
hand.
I mean, you got to think about it. Just Napoleon, who is on a secondary campaign, mind you, he's not fighting the main Prussian force. He's not fighting the British force. He's fighting the Austrians and the Sardinians, and in just under like a year, because it started in April of 1796 was the first
And ended
name.
in 1797 in February, right?
Yeah, in
No, October.
October,
October, sorry.
October. But that's when the treaty was signed. The battle of or the siege of Montauk, well, it ended in February. So,
Yep.
I mean, they went into treating after that. So, I mean,
Yep.
he wrapped up two separate countries in this coalition and just, I'll say, just under a year.
Yeah. And did what everybody else who's fighting the rest of the coalition couldn't do in
Yeah.
one area.
Yeah. And so this was like a really big win. And like I said, they may have collapsed the Venetian Republic, but they created other satellite republics like the Cisalpine Republic and the Guarian Republic. Like those both played a very crucial role in Italy to spread those revolutionary ideals. And we'll notice again as we go on, um, that Italy plays a really sentimental portion. I'll call it sentimental. No other historian I know calls it sentimental. but I'll call it sentimental because he keeps referencing Italy in all of his negotiations later in the Napoleonic Wars. When his son is born, he gets an Italian title. I'm not going to reveal that yet. Um, but like he has a deep love for Italy, and not only all of that, but his Corsican roots. I mean,
I was going to say it goes back to Corsica. It goes
yeah,
back to Corsica.
every time. Um, and so he really, I think his Italian campaign was a godsend to I don't know how else to put it. Like it was the perfect place, the perfect time for this Italian descendant dude to go in and clean house.
Yeah,
Um,
so I think that with that being said, with the start of these new republics, you know, the love for the Italian nature just based off of Corsica and also one of his idols, which was Julius Caesar. I would say that what made him
yeah, dude,
successful
I didn't even
here,
think about that. Julius Caesar being Rome being Italian, him loving
yes,
Rome so much. Yeah, I mean, we talked about the
yes,
fangirling, but like having a deep love for Italy, going back to his love for
it's a
Roman
huge part,
culture,
dude,
huge.
huge
Yeah,
part.
don't know how
So
that slipped my mind.
I would say that like what made him successful here? What were the? I know we talked and I talked about the industrial age of France, you know, and mass production of arms and cannons, things like that. What were the things that because they had that in the eastern side
Mm-hmm.
of Europe as well, where they're fighting. So what divided Napoleon from the rest?
Dude, it was honestly, it was just the generalship, how he used what resources that he had. Like I said, he divided and conquered. He moved quick. He didn't like sitting on his hands. He divided the Sardinians and the Austrians against like away from each other, took out the smallest enemy, and then moved on to the other one. You know,
Yep.
instead of facing two countries at once, he chose the smallest one to get them out quick, and then the biggest one for the later problem. Divide and conquer, speed and mobility, and dude loved math. Dude used artillery. He was very good at skillfully understanding defensive and offensive placements for artillery to completely reshape like the battlefield. Um, and being machine gunners and knowing as many tube strokers as we know, we're really going to love this. Napoleon was a huge fan of what we called a combined arms dilemma. He loved it. He would hit the flank with some artillery, some enfilading artillery if he could, send his cavalry around and push them into a position where they had to choose whether they died from artillery, died from the cavalry, or just stood up fighting the infantry. Like, I mean, he loved the whole combined arms dilemma, and he was one of the first that I would say like implemented it consistently well. Um,
Well, yeah, I think he's the first of his age to have the opportunity to use it, right? And that's not to say that artillery wasn't used beforehand.
mhm.
Um, I
But
would
I mean,
say
we're
that
getting into things like rifling at this point.
yes, yeah. So I would say he's the first to use it brilliantly, and he was very innovative
Yeah,
in
that's
his
a good.
use of it.
Yes, like with the heated shot.
Yes.
Um, I had it in here earlier about the Battle of Toulon. He called it his whiff of grape shot. Um, and that just went to another artillery tactic. Not to take it back too far, but in the Battle of Toulon, he was being charged, um, and he ended up just shooting a bunch of grape shot, waiting until the enemy was close enough, and just turning the cannons and grape shotting like the mob. Right?
Yes, dude.
Like, yeah, dude, just a shotgun blast. Like, I think, dude, I want to say it was like 150 dudes. Sorry,
That's
people.
insane.
Can't, like it was absolutely terrible.
Well, again, it's
Um,
it's the late 18th century. They were dudes.
you know what? Fair point. A
Yeah,
fair point.
but with that being said, with all of these, and I'm curious with all your research, um, what kind of casualties would Napoleon typically report?
Well, that's the funny part is we both watched the Fat Electron guy.
Yep. I love that
Um,
dude. I
dude,
love
I
that dude
love
to
it.
death.
Love it too.
He did a great one on
He's
Johnny B
gonna be
recently.
on one of these, dude. He's gotta be like, we're
I'm gonna
gonna
keep
make
trying to
it big
contact
enough.
him.
We're gonna make it big enough. He's gonna come on one.
Yeah.
Um, but no, so he constantly bolstered his casualties inflicted versus casualties lost.
Okay.
And we see this a lot in the Fat Electrician's videos, primarily when talking about Japan. I've
Yep.
come to notice how
Yep.
America will
Don't fuck with the
always
boats.
or overplay how many we killed, and Japan will just give us a more skewed number, but like a lower number. Be
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
be like, they only shot down 7 planes, where in actuality we shot down like 35 planes,
But we
right?
said 60.
Yeah, and it's just all sorts of a mess, right?
Yeah.
So accurate numbers are kind of hard to come by. Uh, but what really sucks about these casualty numbers is Napoleon doesn't take that many casualties, but he always reports less, and he always over reports the number of enemy casualties and number of cannons seized, because that's something that he always reports too. Is he wants to know how many were killed, how many were captured, and how much equipment was seized, primarily cannons, because dude fucking loved math, right?
Yep.
Like,
Yep.
um, so we're seeing a lot of numbers from the Habsburgs, that are more indicative of like it not being a complete blowout, but they're losing very tactically. Like they're losing at key points that make it like impossible to replace and defend these certain regions. So the casualties are kind of comparable, but obviously reading Napoleon's never-ending letters, he says that he maybe lost like 6 dudes in a duck, like that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah. Yep.
so it's hard to get accurate numbers, and I've got some more numbers in here later, and but that's mainly for the Napoleonic Wars, which is after he becomes emperor. For those of you
So
unaware.
yeah, so I do think it's important here, and that even as historians who dive through history and dive through, primary sources, secondary sources, so on and so forth, when it comes to conflicts then and even now, you will always see a disparagement between the
Mhm.
numbers. So this is not just a Napoleon thing or a Habsburg thing or an Austria thing or an Italy thing or an England thing or an American thing. Really, we're just past the American Revolution. Um, these are one of the things that I think we struggle with as historians to try to find out, like, hey, bitch, like, give me a count. The
Yeah, we can't even
reality,
get 30 Marines to count in front of us without messing it up. Like, how
dude,
are we supposed to
have
keep track of
Marines.
600,000
Dude, fuck
dudes?
off. Yeah, you're right. Have Marines count off on the bus and look at the bus driver's face, right? They can't even get that fucking right. So counting
Well,
casualties
to
on
be
the
fair,
battlefield,
math for Marines only goes up to 12, bro.
dude, I don't fucking do math in public. Let's start with that.
But do you want to know what 1 mil dot? You want to know the distance of the stadial lines and what they represent, and how to lead your target, and
Oh,
I
dude,
can
I
do
got
that
you on.
math.
Yeah, I
I
got
got
you on
that
that
math.
one. Yeah, hey, that math's easy. I'll do that
You want
math
me?
in public.
You want me to graph an inequality, dude? You have a better luck like pulling my teeth. Like,
Now, do you want me to tell you how many people I killed in today's battle as we pushed through the city? It was 1,000.
it's like at least three.
Yeah, 100.
Wait, how
And
much is it to get?
the enemy
How much
force
is it
stands
to
at
get
like
the
30.
NAM?
Yeah.
He said I had to kill 50 to get a navcom. Yeah, I killed 52.
Sorry. So I think it's important to note that. And the reason I asked that question is because there's a lot of disparaging reports throughout history
Mhm.
and a lot of these conflicts, even in World War One, right? When you
Oh
look at World
yeah.
War One numbers. So I think it's important to kind of ask that and how Napoleon reported casualties.
The shittiest thing about this is Napoleon does this to himself when he really shouldn't have, because he was trying to make a name for himself, make yourself look good. He believes in a meritocracy, so he wants to make himself look more meritorious.
Yep.
But it diminishes what he actually accomplished, because he's doing all of these crazy feats, but he's like, it's better than that. like I just got a par two on this golf course. Like I'm that good. And when in actuality, he should have just owned what he did because he's making these big waves. In France, I mean, this is just revitalizing the French Republic. Like it's giving them money, it's giving them territory, it's giving them prestige, it's kicking out them dirty Habsburgs from Italy. And it's demonstrating that revolutionary armies can stand up to these traditional monarchies. Like it's just boosting the French Revolution's morale overall. Um,
Keeping in mind, we keep saying Germany. Germany is not a thing yet.
yeah,
It's the
I don't
same
think I said
area.
Germany.
Well, we have said Germany,
I've
both
said
you and
Germany.
I.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, all
Yeah,
right. Yeah,
yeah,
I'll concede that.
yeah.
Like
So
I don't
both
think I
you
just
and
said Germany.
nah, both you and I have said Germany throughout this because we're so used to the production of like World War I, World War II. And at this time, really Germany is kind of a byproduct of future conflicts that derive from this. The reality is that this is all one area. It's the Austrian-Hungary Empire, the same as you have to the south, the Ottoman Empire, things like that.
Mm-hmm. Sorry, now I'm looking up when Germany became a country because
Let's see it, dude.
I've
I'm
got to
curious
know.
now. I'm curious now.
Um, yeah, literally because of the Napoleonic Wars, the German Confederation was formed in 1815.
Holy fuck, dude! I'm a historian. I'm a historian, dude.
Yeah, I like that. All right.
God damn it, dude. Sometimes I love the fact that I've read so many
So,
goddamn
yeah,
history
and
books.
you just kind of pull it out of nowhere. Yeah, dude, I
Yeah,
love doing
dude.
that. It's best when you just go on a tangent and you're like, damn, dude, I just sounded smart as hell.
And then you have to look it up, dude. And you're like, holy fuck, that's right.
Exactly. I was like, man, that must have been repressed knowledge that I read somewhere
The, the,
sometime.
the problem with this podcast is it's a glass of history. So I've read so much history drunk that I don't know what I fucking know anymore, dude.
um, but shit, yeah. When Napoleon sends all these numbers back, he's obviously, he's making himself a national hero. He's got a reputation now for being just this huge military genius, dude. He's like just dub after dub after dub, just winning them left and right. Oh, you wanted Italy? Here's Italy. Oh, you wanted me to go into the Netherlands? Ha! I took the Netherlands. Like, what more do you
Without
want
going
from me?
there.
Yeah,
Without going there.
straight up. Yeah, I just gave him Venice, a town we didn't even own.
Yep.
Like, dude just bamboozled the Austrians.
Yep.
Um, and it gave him some political leverage, like because, like I said, he got the eye of Robespierre in the National Assembly, which during this time is when they started being referred to as the Directory. Um, it's a weird concept. The concept doesn't change. The best way I know how to explain it is the difference between the First Continental Convention and Congress, excuse me, the First Continental Congress and the Second Continental Congress.
Oh, we know all about that.
It's the same thing in essence. It's just one is more refined. The National Assembly was the rough draft, and what they call the Directory is the more fine tuned parliamentary body.
Yeah.
Um,
So I do think it's important as you go off of all the impacts of this. I do think it's important to note how much more this inflamed that whole fight. And we're going to get to this later. But that whole coalition we talked about and that
mhm.
Italian campaign, it's only going to get worse,
and
dude.
and that
Because now
coalition just
you've,
comes back time and
yes,
time again.
yes, dude. And the sad part about it is, and I know that our focus right now is kind of Napoleon at the end of the Italian campaign, but I do think it's an important side note for foresight and for foresight alone to note like we have now disrupted the entire balance of
Oh
mankind.
yeah, oh yeah. Um, Divine rights, brother.
Yeah.
I mean, it's trampling all over that,
Yep.
and we'll hit it like you said. We'll hit it more um, as we go on, and we're coming up on an hour now. So we're just keep pushing it farther and farther back. But I
That's
do,
fine.
I love this, how important and how strenuous the relationship that Napoleon has to navigate with the papacy.
Oh yeah.
And especially now that he's in Italy, because obviously the Vatican is in Italy because
Yep.
it's inside of Rome.
Yep.
So it's like a dynamic that it's starting to take place now, and it's only going to become more strenuous, I guess I will say, as we
Now
go on.
keeping in mind, and I could be, correct me if I'm wrong on this, but England at this point has already given up the papacy of Rome, and they have gone under Protestant leadership for their divine right of kings. So that has led to a strenuous relationship between France and the rest that still follow the papacy.
Yeah.
Um, but I do believe that England has started to follow the Protestant divine right of kings.
Well, it's
I could be wrong on that.
they already kind of had split um with the Anglo-Saxons in like the early first century. So I guess like they were kind of part of the Catholic Church, and I'm not gonna lie, England is really confusing to me for a lot of reasons, but
Dude.
it's primarily just the names. I you can't tell me there's not one single person of merit that wasn't named Edward, William, Henry, or George Charles, Elizabeth, Victoria, Mary. Dude, like that's it. James, sorry, forgot James. So you have these 9 names that just get hundreds of years. So you very well may be right.
So, and you're not wrong. When you look at, and again, this is not an English podcast, this is a Napoleon podcast. However,
When we get
like
to
I
England,
said,
we'll be more well versed. I very
yep,
much promise.
yep, and like I said when we did the first episode that we ever did, is that the setting in in these situations means a lot. When you're researching things as a historian and you're looking at, this happened and this happened, the political climate and the diplomatic climate and things of that nature, all of that matter. Um, Now, whereas nowadays you might see, which is simply formal, the king and queen navigate towards Rome. I don't even know if that's true. Um, but at this point, and keeping in mind that the Protestant Revolution in England is what led us to talk about Aham in the United States
Mhm.
during that revolution, because a lot of the Puritans left and went to um the Dutch, dude. Help me out here. Norway, right?
Yeah,
No, Dutch. That's not Norway.
yeah, it is.
It is
Denmark. Sorry.
Denmark, motherfucker. That yeah.
Dude,
I'm
we've been
sorry.
drinking, okay?
Yeah, we
I
have
know
been
we've only
drinking.
been recording this episode for an hour, but we've been drinking.
So I will tell you this as a historian and somebody who loves geography, the Dutch is the one fucking thing that fucks me up notoriously. You could tell me again tomorrow that, hey, dude, it's Denmark. I'm going to fuck it up. I'm going to fuck it up because it's the one thing in history that fucks me up constantly. Dude, you've got to beat me in the head with a bat named Dutch that says Denmark
Just
in
remember Arnold
parentheses underneath it,
Schwarzenegger.
and I'll remember that. All right. Now
Just
he's
remember.
Austrian. He's Austrian.
No, but he played. What's his name? What's his name in Predator? Dutch, you son of a
Oh, it
bitch.
is Dutch. It is Dutch. So, with that being said, that led to the divide between the Protestants and what we know um, as they say in the um, gangs in New York, Roman popery. Right? Hey, dude, they say it in gangs in New York. Watch it again. I promise you.
All
He
right.
said, "Save the world from your Roman popery." That's exactly what he says.
I did look it up. It's 1534 is when England actually separated from the papacy.
God damn it, dude. See
So,
again?
yeah.
I read all these things and I don't even know what I fucking know anymore, man.
And read the.
Yep. So again, we make jokes and we joke about this, but the reality of it is that Matt and I read a lot of fucking
Oh, dude.
history.
It's
And
it's it's January 21st, and I'm like 5 books deep right now.
yes, dude, and
And
that's the thing is that sometimes, guys, it all blends together, and you even question yourself when you look back on that, and you're like, "Well, wait, am I right?" I'm pretty sure they separated, and it is. So you read so much, and especially when you're myself, who's an American history major, who focused mostly on colonial United States
Mhm.
and postpartum United States, if you will. Um,
I like that term. Just postpartum United
yeah,
States.
yeah, yeah. Yeah. With that being said, there are things in other history aspects that I'm like, hey, I've read and studied that. I've wrote on that. I've did papers on that.
Oh yeah.
But sometimes those lines blur. Now, with that being said, I do know that we had talked about getting to Egypt tonight.
Yeah,
We're
I don't think we're making it.
we're not going to get to Egypt tonight. But what I will
We'll get
say
it next
before
time though.
I know, but before we do an outro, I think it's important because you did so much fucking research on this topic.
All right.
I think it's important for you to at least talk about the ramifications for Europe as a whole.
Oh yeah, dude. It it did exactly what the coalition was fighting against. Like it disrupted the balance of power in Europe. And it ultimately like weakened Austria, which we'll see time and time again. How Austria and Prussia are constantly weakened by Napoleon to the point where they go from what we would consider like a great power, because superpowers don't come around until 1945, but like a great power leading in Europe, like they constantly just teeter that line. And there's a phrase that later on gets said where all Prussia is a crazy idea in an army, to which the Prussians told Napoleon, at least we have an army. So it's like this back and forth, like constantly teetering on this great power versus secondhand. But the Habsburgs are such a big notorious family that they just kind of stay. And it marked the spread of revolutionary ideals like beyond France. He's not in France laying these revolutionary ideas, he's in Italy. He's laying the groundwork for the Napoleonic Wars. Like he is already starting, in a sense, to gain a foothold of controlling an empire, and what he wants to maintain, hold, and accomplish with the Napoleonic Wars later in his life. Um, I think that kind of wraps it up for the Italian campaign, unless you
I
got
mean,
something to add.
no, I mean it does. I think your comments towards Prussia and at least we have an army, things like that, dude, that is terrible foreshadowing for the Prussians.
Oh yeah.
Because the reality of it is that the rest of Europe, for we're not going to focus on Europe in the next podcast. We might get into it a little bit, but
uh,
the next
I think
podcast,
I was gonna say, I think the only thing about Europe that we'll talk about really is like the main impacts of the Egyptian
yeah, yeah,
campaign, but
we're
nothing
gonna
crazy.
we'll focus on Egypt probably. We were supposed to get to it in this podcast. However, again, when it comes to history, guys, there's a lot of things that make us dive down rabbit holes and talk about, and it's all important. It's all
It's all
important.
important. That's the thing, is like you can't just set up like Napoleon without talking about the French Revolution,
Yep.
which in and of itself could be its own podcast. Like, so, like, what do we do with that?
Yes.
How much do we hit it? And it's just, it's all just, it spirals. It
Dude,
honestly spirals.
you're right. So and we're getting towards the outro now, guys, but
Mhm.
I talked to Matt about this when we started looking into Napoleon. And when he looked at what I was researching, he was like, nah, dude, I'm looking at Napoleon. And
Yeah.
I told him, I was like, dude, I'm looking at the setting, like the Marie Antoinette, the French Revolution. What's going on in that climate? What surrounds that area? And I think that's what makes me and Matt great as a team is that Matt's like, hey, I've got this individual. I'm hyper focused on this individual, and
Yeah.
I'm
Oh
going to tell
yeah.
you about him. And I'm like, oh wait, but by the way, this is happening at the same time. So this helps like set the setting for where we're at.
Yeah.
And I love it, dude.
Oh yeah. No, we make a good team. I will say, it's a good dynamic here. Um, so I think today we'll wrap it up. We went over the Italian campaign. He won a lot of victories in the Italian campaign. He made a name for himself to the Directory, which was previously known as the National Assembly. He's got himself a foothold and a reputation. Dude's a household name at the end of the Italian campaign. It's like he's Mad Dog at this point. So people know who he is. He embodies the ideals of a small R Republican, and he sets himself up with this campaign to take what he believes is his. But he's got a little bit more growing to do in the next episode that we're going to go on. He's got a lot more growing to do in his tactics. He refines some of those in Egypt, as well as a litany of different cultural aspects, religious aspects, and kind of how he decides to deal with subversive, I guess is the best way to say it, views of than his own. Because he's from Corsica, Italy slash France, so he's got all of these generally whitewashed cultural cues, cultural norms, and he's about to go balls deep in Egypt. Super
which is
high,
which is which
high
is Ottoman
Ottoman.
Empire. Yeah,
Yeah.
Ottoman Empire at the time.
Yeah. So you're talking like radical Muslims. You're talking like people who have only ever lived in the desert on the Nile. You're talking like mercenaries. You're talking uh, hot summers, long desert marches, um, pyramids. I mean, it's a complete cultural shift. I mean, I remember whenever I first landed in Afghanistan and that how, or Pakistan, or not Pakistan, Kuwait. Definitely not Pakistan, Kuwait. And just how different it was there, just driving through Kuwait City and seeing how the roads even worked. You could tell it was just different.
Dude, I've been to Egypt. I've been to Alexandria, and it's world different. It's a beautiful place, dude.
Take me with you, baby.
The water, just to kind of illustrate the landing, dude. The water was the most beautiful fucking blue as we sailed into Alexandria, and I know that some of these Middle Eastern waterways get sludged up with garbage, things like that, because waste disposal is not the same in some areas, things
I
like
mean,
that.
we got to keep in mind a lot of them are third world countries still.
Yep. But sailing into Egypt and around the Alexander area, absolutely beautiful, dude. Beautiful. The people there were great. The flies fucking suck because they're about the size of your thumb and they land on you. When you like swat them away, they like fly away just for a second and they land back on you.
Oh no,
So I actually slept with a gecko on my chest that would eat the flies as I slept. Um,
it's like
but yeah,
Australia but with mosquitoes.
oh yeah, dude. But you're absolutely right. So eh, we've kind of laid the groundwork going into the Egyptian campaign, which we will cover next episode.
Mm-hmm.
There is a bit of humility for our protagonist, if you will, in the
I
next
would say he's a
episode.
protagonist.
Yeah, you're
Over
right.
overall, I actually think he was a really a good dude, and
I
I'll
don't.
explain more of that at the end.
Yeah, I don't think he was a bad dude. I think he had ideals, and those ideals drove him. This is very much different than what we think of in modern
Yeah,
20th century dictatorships, things like that.
yeah,
This is very much
for
different.
sure.
Um, but there is some humility in the next episode that we're going to get into.
Yeah,
However, with that being said, for our listeners, I love you. Thanks for coming in on another trip. Matt, as always, I love you, buddy.
I love you
Uh,
too, brother.
Great podcast, great conversation, great research on your part.
Thank you.
I just added a little bit
Sourced.
in there. I spiced it a little bit.
A little spicy razzle dazzle.
Yeah, dude, I do whatever I can. It's four alarm cheese, dude. I like the spicy cheese.
All right, man. I love you. Have a good night.
Love you too, buddy.